Watching the film from Week 10's disaster on Thursday night, I do think Marcus Mariota showed some signs of progress, but nonetheless, I'll still be making the case today for why the Falcons absolutely should be starting Desmond Ridder moving forward, all on today's Week 10 All-22 review.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and a.k.a. your very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So, guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. It's free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Hit that like, hit that bell, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So we are coming at you on YouTube on Sunday evening. And if you're on your preferred podcast platform, you're checking us out Monday morning. And, you know, because of the short week coming from the Thursday night game, we are doing our All-22 review now. And so, as opposed to, you know, on a normal Sunday, we do it Wednesday. So it's roughly the same distance that we kind of have from the previous week's game. And, you know, today's episode a big part of it will be basically making the case for why Desmond Ridder should be the starting moving forward. But in order to make that case, I do have to lay the groundwork that I do think Marcus Mariota, despite, you know, Thursday nights, Friday mornings, rapid reaction episodes saying, you know, I don't think Mariota has made progress. I do think rewatching the film, I do think there are signs that Mariota has made progress. And again, let me make this clear. I do think the Falcons moving forward should start Desmond Ridder at quarterback. But I do think we have to be honest and watch the film honestly. And that's what I try to do, try to be as objective as I possibly can. And just because I have that belief does not necessarily mean I go back and watch this game and not see some positive signs for Marcus Mariota when it comes to the progression and namely his ability to throw with anticipation. That's something that Mariota has rarely done this season. And I think there were 3 or 4 throws in this Carolina game where he showed good anticipation this week, which is something he hasn't done throughout the season. I would probably argue, again, I'm pulling this number out of my butt, but through the first 9 games, there were maybe like a half dozen throws or maybe more where he showed good anticipation on those throws. And then to see 3 or 4 of those in one game, to me, is a sign of progress that Mariota is making progress despite, you know, some of the issues that he also showed on Thursday night. And we're not going to go through all of those throws, but there was 1 or 2 that I think perfectly summarizes the Mariota coaster. There were 2 back-to-back plays on the second series of the game where Mariota did a good job on the first play, showing that anticipation, and the second play kind of missed what should have been an easy throw. And that's kind of the highs and lows of the Mariota coaster. And the first one was that 19-yard throw he threw to Demir Bird on the second possession. The Panthers were in man coverage. They had Drake London to the left and Demir Bird wide to the right. And they had a single high safety in the middle of the field, and that safety shaded over to Drake London's side of the field, leaving a window for Mariota to hit Bird on a deep dig. And the great thing about this, he threw this ball with a collapsing pocket before Bird had even gone into his break. And again, that's something that we just haven't seen anticipatory throws like this from Mariota, especially when there has been a collapsing pocket or pressure in his face. There's been too often this year where Mariota's eye level, we've referred to it in the past, where it would dip, all right, where there was pressure. He would get a flash of color from the opposing team, and that would cause him to sort of try to escape the pocket rather than keeping his eyes downfield and delivering in pressure. And, to be fair, that's a normal human reaction. But like that's part of the reason why being a quarterback is so hard, because you get these peripheral flashes of color and guys are trying to hit you and you're standing in the pocket and you got to deliver. And that's what separates the great quarterbacks from the good ones. That's what separates the good ones from the not so good ones. And so it was nice to see Mariota doing this in this game on that particular play, hitting Bird for 19 yards. Bird wound up losing 2 yards after the catch, trying to avoid the safety coming over the middle of the field. So instead of being that 20-plus yard play, it wound up being a 19-yard play. And so it was nice to see that comfort seemingly for Mariota, being able to hit his receivers before they even enter their breaks. Again, not something that we've seen a ton of. And, that's a good sign for Mariota, because we haven't seen throughout his career him being a guy that is winning pre-snap, winning with quick processing, quick decisive decisions, and good timing or whatever. He's a guy that plays off a feel, and that feel is what leads to the kind of the pros and cons of his ability to win off structure. All right. Like, the pros of that is him actually creating off structure. The cons of that is some of the throws that we saw in Thursday night's game, where he was trying to create off structure and it led to some problems. And in fact, later in this drive on the second series of the game for the Falcons, you saw two instances of back-to-back plays where Kobe Gossett was flagged for holding, where Mariota was able to escape pressure. The first time hitting Kyle Pitts over the middle of the field for a completion. Obviously, that play was wiped out due to the holding call on Kobe Gossett. And then the very next play being one of the first of several balls where Mariota was able to escape the pressure, get outside the pocket, and then try to throw a deep ball to Drake London, but wound up throwing it, back towards the middle of the field across his body, rather than throwing it, trying to lead London away from the defense, and instead throwing it back towards the defense. And that almost resulting in an interception. And that perfectly illustrates the pros and the cons of Marcus Mariota's ability to play off a field and play off of the structure. But going back to the initial plays, what we're talking about, after that Bird completion earlier in the drive, the next play, right, you see this clear sign of progress from Mariota on his Bird completion. Then the very next play, the Falcons run a play action rollout, and Mariota's rolling route and misses basically a wide open Damiere Byrd, underneath in the flat, which should have been an easy 6+ yard completion, right? So the Falcons run the play action, right? Mariota turns his back to the defense. He's rolling right. And then once he gets his head back around to scan the field, it takes him 1.5 seconds. I got my stopwatch out to go from getting his head back around to finally locating Bird and delivering. And this is what we're talking about. We're just talking about his anticipation on these throws, but we've talked about how Mariota's not great turning his back to the defense, because it takes him some time once he takes his eyes off of the defense to get his head around and really process what he's seeing. Going back to what I'm saying, he's a guy that plays off a feel and whatnot. And so that 1.5 seconds, is didn't prevent Mariota from being able to make the throw, but you want him to be a lot more decisive in this situation. And then when it came time to making the throw, he made a bad throw, right? Instead of throwing it, inside so Bird could catch it cleanly inbounds and potentially turn up field and get more than 6 yards and get a first down with Dante Jackson playing well off of him. Mariota throws it to the sideline and Bird has to try to make a catch towards the sideline. He doesn't get both of his feet in bounds. It's just a bad throw. And to me, these back-to-back plays where you see the pros, the positive of Mariota's anticipation working, and then you see the cons and the negatives of Mariota just missing what should have been an easy completion for him to Damiere Byrd, is kind of the perfect summary of the Mariota coaster, the highs and the lows and all that sort of thing. And so, then you get later in the drive, I think he hit a easy completion to Kadero Hodge after missing that throw to Damiere Byrd. And that was another play where the Falcons used play action, but unlike the previous play, the Falcons use that play action out of the shotgun, so Mariota doesn't have to take his eyes off the ball. He can just sort of fake to the running back, keep his eyes on the defense, and he was able to hit Kadero Hodge on a 12-yard dig route. And I wound up posting the 5 of those plays on Twitter and link to them in the comment below, as I often do here on these all-22 reviews. The play to Bird that worked, the play to Bird that didn't work, the play to Hodge, the play to Pitts, where he was able to create off structure that was nullified by the holding call, and the play to London where he tried to create off structure and almost threw an interception on the play. So I'll link to those 5 plays, below in the comments. But today we'll continue the conversation talking about why Ridder should be the quarterback moving forward. And while I don't expect Arthur Smith to quite agree with me, I've made peace with the idea that Mariota might remain the starter. And again, there is progress. There's signs of progress, right? If that's the choice that Arthur Smith is going to move forward, to like, okay, he'll look at those 3 to 4 positive throws, anticipatory throws, and say, okay, we just need to eliminate the negative stuff from Mariota, and we'll build off of those 3 or 4 positive plays. But I feel like, Ridder is going to be able to make some of those plays that Mariota isn't going to make. And that's the main reason why he should be the starting moving forward. And I'll make that case as we continue today's episode, guys. But before we get there, I want to tell you about Total Wine and More, because this holiday you can find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find your new favorite, say, single barrel bourbon, or find that perfect gift for everyone on your wish list, and get some help from a friendly guide in store, all with the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. Find what you love what you find, only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21. So, guys, before we continue making the case for Desmond Ridder, I do want to let you know what you should be for your second listen, given that Locked On Falcons is your first listen. Of course, all of you, first thing in the morning, are listening to Locked On Falcons. But for your second listen, right after that, check out Locked On Sports Today. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts that only Locked On can provide by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today, available on Odyssey, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So the case for Ridder, and this is going to be built off of a question, submission from a listener question from William Sawyer at Will Sawyer 21 on Twitter. He says, how similar are the passing concepts that Mariota is running now in comparison to the passing concepts that Ridder ran in college and the preseason? I know Arthur Smith has quarterbacks go through multiple checks. In theory, if passing concepts are similar enough, wouldn't the best thing for Ridder be experience at the helm and actually go through those checks at the line with actual NFL speed in comparison to college/third stringers and the preseason? So yes, William, I do think experience is the best teacher, right? And so, Ridder getting reps is theoretically only going to help him become a better player moving forward, and should hopefully lead to the Falcons, having better quarterback play moving forward. Now, in terms of the similarities of the concepts, this goes back to a conversation that myself and others were talking about pre and post draft, in talking about how Ridder ran plenty of West Coast concepts at Cincinnati, and which is why people like myself, Kevin Knight of the Falcoholic, as well, often thought, going all the way back to like January and February, thinking that Ridder was the best fit in Atlanta because schematically the Falcons and Cincinnati ran similar sort of concepts with some of those West Coast concepts. Now, I don't know the exact number of concepts that they run memorized. I don't have that number. I don't have a percentage where I can guesstimate the overlap or anything like that. But they run a lot of the same things they ran under Ridder in the preseason that they run today under Mariota. And I probably could argue, without necessarily having, a mountain of data to back up this argument, but I would argue that they probably ran much more of a West Coast style offense that is much more similar to what you see Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan run with Ridder in the preseason than they currently are running with Mariota. You could probably make that case, but I think the main reason why you like Ridder more so is some of these concepts, like, say, turning your back to the defense, proved to be a non-issue for Ridder at Cincinnati, nor an issue for Ridder in the preseason. right? And that was the thing that really stood out about Ridder in the summer, which led to myself and so many others, jumping feet first onto the hype train for Desmond Ridder, was because he showed a level of processing and decisiveness that showed that he was operating from a neck up standpoint at a much more advanced level than you would typically expect. Right. And throwing with anticipation was not an issue for Desmond Ridder in the preseason. He threw often with anticipation. And so that to me is the root of the case for Desmond Ridder. And there may be growing pains early on with Desmond Ridder as a starter. I don't expect him. I would love to see it, but I don't expect him to come in and have like 130 passer rating in his first start and completing 75% of his passes right off the bat, right? There could be a Ridder coaster, similar where you have these ups and downs that typically come with your rookie inexperienced quarterback, right? That is a reasonable expectation. Now, I don't think it's an automatic assumption, again, going back to the fact that the reason why people thought, Ridder was QB1 and why Ridder was so impressive in the preseason, arguably more impressive than any other rookie quarterback in this class, was because, his processing, and he's a little bit more advanced from the neck up, as I said earlier, than your typical rookie. But I do think when you look at the rest of the Falcons schedule and how relatively soft their next couple of games are, even if Ridder does come in and you have, these ups and downs, you have a Ridder coaster, like you have a Mariota coaster. I think this team is positioned over the next couple of games to effectively navigate that. No different than they would be with Mariota continuing to be the starter and having those ups and downs, right? You look at Football Outsiders DVOA rankings through week 10, right? Or up to week 10, heading into this past Sunday. And the Falcons were 16th overall in DVOA, 8th ranked offense, 29th ranked defense, right? And you look at this week's upcoming opponents. Chicago is 28th overall. Washington is 24th overall the week after. Pittsburgh 25th. And then after the bye, New Orleans is the first game you have coming up, and they're 23rd overall, right? Then you have Baltimore, who's 4th overall in DVO rankings, Arizona, who's 29th, and Tampa Bay's 10th. So to me, the idea is these next 4 games are very winnable games because, at least theoretically, if you put any stock into DVOA, they're basically telling you who's the better team overall. So the Falcons should be the better team heading into these next 4 games, at least, and they should be very winnable, and they should allow Desmond Ridder to get his feet wet. And even if he isn't all the things that we all hope and dream of him being right away, you still should be able to win these games moving forward. And he'll play within structure. Hopefully, he won't be pulling a Mariota and trying to do too much and pressing and all that stuff, and show the anticipation that he showed throughout the preseason. And, you don't have to necessarily wait 10 weeks as we have waited for Marcus Mariota to start throwing with anticipation. You might be able to see that in game 1 or, game 5 or game 7, right? With Desmond Ridder. Right. And, like I would argue, if we've seen a dozen anticipatory throws from Marcus Mariota this year during the regular season, right? Like Ridder probably had just as many, a dozen or so of those types of throws just in the 3 preseason games he played alone. So William, I do think there is a great deal of overlap in terms of the concepts that are being asked for, to be run in this offense from what Ridder was running in Cincinnati and in the preseason. But I think you get him those reps now and you try to see what progress he shows over the next 7 games. Right. And hoping that he doesn't come in and be like your typical rookie that's coming from, like, say, a spread system and operating in a brand new system. And therefore there's going to be much bigger growing pains. So, I don't expect Ridder to come in and immediately hit the ground running, although I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that, he'll be as efficient running this Falcons offense in the regular season as he was in the preseason because of his quick processing ability. But, I feel like even if that doesn't manifest immediately on the football field, with time, whether that means by the end of the season or going into next season, you're going to see this Falcons offense evolve, that key word that we've been using several times over the last month, into a real NFL offense, right? Where they're not relying on running the football down 2 scores, where you don't feel like throwing the ball in the 2nd and 8 is a doomed proposition, right? That is an offense that is a normal level of balance on first downs, right? The Falcons, have a league low passing percentage on 1st and 10 this year. They only throw the ball on 29% of their 1st and 10 plays this year, which is the lowest mark in the league. The league average is 49%, by the way. And, part of that is owed to the fact of how good the Falcons are running the ball on 1st and 10, right? They're 4th in the NFL in yards per carry on 1st and 10 runs. But what's notable is they're also like 4th in yards per attempt on 1st and 10 passes. And so it's not as if like they haven't been able to throw the football. The point being that the reason why they have this league low passing percentage on 1st and 10 this year is by choice, is because Arthur Smith is basically telling us that he does not have confidence in the quarterback to make those 1st and 10 runs, to play a lot more balanced of an attack on 1st downs, moving forward with Marcus Mariota at the helm. And, again, whether you would get immediate change to that with Desmond Ridder, or that's something that you have to work towards by the end of this season or again into next season, to me, like, you kind of already know what you are with Marcus Mariota, and I don't know if it's going to change all that much despite the quote unquote progress that I illustrated earlier that he showed in week 10. I feel like, the timeline, 10 weeks for him to basically make 3 or 4 anticipatory throws. Sorry, I can't talk. Anticipatory throws in a single game is kind of the norm that you would expect from any halfway competent quarterback. I mean, certainly that was the norm we thought for Matt Ryan. And again, I know it's not necessarily fair to compare Marcus Mariota and Matt Ryan, but even then, it's not as if we're not comparing him to peak Matt Ryan. We're comparing him to late stage, quote unquote, washed Matt Ryan. And so, I feel like it's in the best interest of this team to try to get Desmond Ridder to a point where he can be that guy sooner versus later. And that to me is ultimately the reason why Desmond Ridder should be the starter, because I feel like you don't necessarily have to make that choice to run it, 70% of the time on 1st and 10, theoretically, if you can develop Ridder. And again, the question is, can you develop Ridder, and what is the timeline for that? Obviously, but you're not going to be able to start that process until he gets on the field. So we'll see if the Falcons, follow that advice. If they don't, then, no sweat off my back, like, my job isn't on the line. And I don't say that to be like, not making the change the quarterback means Arthur Smith is on the hot seat or anything like that. But I just know, like, look, I'm gonna still be sitting here talking about the Falcons on Locked On Falcons Monday through Friday on YouTube or wherever you're listening to me, and whether it's Ridder, whether it's Mariota. And so, like, I'm not losing any sleep over that choice, right? Obviously, I, like you all, I have an emotional investment in that choice, but like, at the end of the day, like, it ain't my job. So we'll talk a little bit more about the coaching staff and the jobs that they're doing, because a coach that some people think should be on the hot seat is Dean Pease, and we'll get into that's a little baffling for me to wrap up today's episode. But before we get there, guys, I do want to let you know that if you're loving, Locked On Falcons, you can find other great Atlanta-based podcasts on Roku and Amazon Fire TV as part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta app. Just download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app today to get that same great local coverage 24/7 and for free on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And guys, now I want to tell you about Prize Picks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It takes less than 60 seconds to enter, and it's great because you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. And they offer projections, whether it's NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, and so much more. Prize Picks, it's fast, it's easy, it's safe. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you another $100 to play with. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to use that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. So, guys, before we wrap up today's episode, I do want to plug what is on deck for tomorrow's episode. Tomorrow we'll be joined by Alan Stirk, former co-host here of Locked On Falcons, and we'll mostly be talking about the Falcons season, but I'm sure Alan will have some thoughts on the Ridder versus Mariota conversation. So look forward to that as your first listen on tomorrow, on Tuesday, or Monday night if you want to check us out on YouTube. So that is on deck in the future. But like, we'll wrap up today's episode talking about, some of the rhetoric I've heard on Twitter and elsewhere. I've gotten a couple of questions from folks about this, and there seems to be this notion that Dean Pease is on the hot seat, and I don't get that. Like I don't understand why people are expecting the Falcons defense to do more than what they're currently doing. And I know expectations differ between individuals or whatever, right? But every game outside of the Cincinnati game, the Falcons have been in it, right? They've, it's gone down to the final possession. The Falcons have either had a chance to win it, tie it, or seal a win, in the final minutes of the games. And so I look at those situations and I go, like, sometimes the defense has made the plays to help seal those wins or get the wins, and sometimes they haven't. But like, this is to me the epitome of the scrappy defense that we all kind of wanted, and I thought we all expected for this team this year. I mean, you go back to what we were talking about in July, where we were, I can't speak for everybody else, but I was sitting here going like, we got to sign Eddie Goldman. We got to get a difference maker because we're about to have a bottom 5 defensive line. And we also thought that, the offensive line was going to be bottom 5. And certainly they've exceeded our expectations as far as a run blocking unit. They've arguably a top 5 run blocking unit, although pass protecting, they probably look a little bit more closer to bottom 5 than top 5. And I don't think the defensive line has been awful, but it goes back to some of the things I said in September where they were exceeding my expectations because I expected them to be awful, right? Grady Jarrett, especially in September, was off to like a all-pro start, right? We had Jarvis Davis come on the podcast and say, oh, Grady Jarrett's going to make a Pro Bowl, all-pro this year. He's kind of, slowed down since then. Taquan Graham was very good during that first month of the season, and he's kind of tapered off a little bit. Abdullah Anderson, after sort of getting promoted, came on strong, but he's kind of settled into being that sort of limited rotational piece over the last month as well. We have 13 sacks in 10 games, right? That puts them on pace for 22 this year, which is more than the 18 that they had last year, which was worse than the NFL. But, for the most part, my perception is the reason why they're on pace for higher is mostly because of Grady Jarrett, because last year Grady Jarrett only had one of those 18 sacks, and this year he has 4.5 sacks. So the fact that, those 3.5 more that he has this year is basically the difference between 18 and 22 that they're on pace for. They had 4 sacks in that week 1 loss to the Saints, and they've had 9 sacks in the 9 games since then, right? Which is basically averaging per game exactly what they averaged last year. So, I sit here and I go like, what are we expecting this defense with a bottom 5 pass rush, arguably a bottom 5 run defense, to do more than what they are? Again, going back to their DVO rank, they're 29th in the league. Like, is anybody surprised by that? Right? Like, are we expecting Dean Pease to do the thing that a lot of people thought he could do last year, or people making that same mistake and thinking that he can just snap his fingers and invent a pass rush? Right? Or are people really believing into the notion that, because our linebackers are an inch taller and 5 pounds heavier, that was suddenly going to unlock the potential of this defense? I heard a lot of people talk about that in the offseason, and I just kind of sat here and like, what are you guys talking about? Right? AJ Terrell's given up 5 red zone touchdowns this year in the first 6 games of the season, right? Fabian Monroe gave up 6 all of last year, right? Like, and I don't say that to throw AJ Terrell under the bus, but it's like your best player is not playing great football. And so, like, what are you expecting Dean Pease to do? Right? Or people still butthurt about the Falcons not making a big, bold move for pass rusher at the trade deadline? And I go, like, for what? Right? Like, why, going back to the conversations we had leading up to that, like, why would the Falcons give up premium assets? Like, other than the Rashad Fenton trade, that was maybe the best you could hope for. Maybe they could have made 3 Rashad Fenton trades and give up their next 3 years of 7th round picks. But other than that, like, what were you really expecting, right? You didn't really expect the Falcons to give up a top 100 pick, right? And lose out on a potential starter. Again, the draft is a crapshoot, so there's nothing guaranteed, but a player that at least had decent odds at the very least to wind up being a 5+ year starter for you. That's what you expect for top 100 picks, right? Guys that are going to be, starters, through the life of their rookie contracts and potentially beyond, right? And why would you give that up so that you could do what this year? Increase your playoff odds by 12%? What was the point of that? What is that worth losing out on a potential 5+ year starter? I don't think it is. Right? Like, the Falcons aren't going to do anything in January. Like, again, we hope to be a scrappy team or whatever if we get that far, but like, what I don't get it. Um, like how many players, let's look at a good defense. How many players on defense could start on a good defense, like say Philadelphia, right? I think who are third in defensive DVO currently heading into this past Sunday, right? Okay, AJ Terrell could start over James Bradbury, probably certainly last year, not necessarily based off of how he's played this year, right? You could put Grady over Javon Hargrave, say, put him next to Fletcher Cox, right? Maybe you can make a case for Richie Grant starting over Marcus Epps at safety. Maybe you can make a case that Isaiah Oliver and Avonte Maddox are kind of a wash at nickel cornerback. Okay, that's it. Like four guys, maybe four guys that would start currently on the Falcons that would start on a quote unquote playoff caliber defense like Philadelphia's. That's it, right? Now maybe you're sitting here going like, "Hey, Aaron, the Eagles linebackers stink. T.J. Edwards and Kaiser White aren't, superstars. Our guys, Michael Walker / Rashawn Evans are just as good as those guys." Okay, yeah, you that wouldn't be a wrong point, but you should note that that's the reason why that is because the Eagles team building philosophy basically believes that our defensive line and our secondary are so good that we can go with replacement level linebackers. And it's like, I think there's like a lesson in that. Maybe there's something, a kernel of wisdom in that belief. Well, maybe we'll revisit that in March. I don't know. We'll see. But like I sit here and I go like, I don't get it. Like you're allowed to criticize the defense if you want. I just don't get what people are expecting from the Falcons defense that they aren't getting. Right? They're scrappy. They've kept you in competitive in 90% of your games this year with a chance to win 90% of your games this year. What else do you want? Is that fireable offense for Dean Pete? I don't get it. So I just wanted to bring that up to close out today's episode because we're talking about coaches on the hot seat, and I just kind of go like, look, I've been as critical of this coaching staff, from November of last year to August. Spent 9 months being mostly critical of the offensive coaching staff, not so much the defensive coaching staff, because I'm just like, what are you expecting out of them? I don't believe scheme doesn't matter on defense, but scheme kind of doesn't matter. Right? I don't really believe that, but I kind of believe it, so it's like when you get the Jimmies and the Joes, like then we can have expectations for this defense, and then you can hold Dean Pease accountable for a lack of progress or whatever that they may or may not be showing. But I don't blame Dean Pease for being like, hey, I love what our defense is doing. I love the progress they're showing because we're in 90% of our games in the final minutes of the game. We're playing, I'm not going to say 60 minutes of good football, but we're playing 60 minutes of competitive football 90% of the time. That was not the case a year ago. That is progress to me. So, give him some dudes, and then let's see what other progress he can make. So that's what I will say. I just don't have the smoke for Dean Pease that other people seem to have. So that's a little baffling to me, but we will leave it there, guys. And we will plug tomorrow's episode for your first listen again with Alan Stirk. Also, for your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today, as well as the other shows on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. You got A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanitra Batiste, all in the same podcast feed. And of course, you can check out Locked On Bulldogs. I was about to say Locked On Bulls for some reason. I don't know why that popped in my head. Locked On Braves and Locked On Hawks as part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. Guys, if you want to submit questions for future Q&As, we'll have an opportunity to potentially do another one in the middle of this week in our normal sort of all-22 slot on Wednesday. So you can, of course, submit your questions via Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. You can leave a comment here on Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, or you can drop your question in the Locked On Falcons Discord, a link in the description below. Really appreciate you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed your Sunday free of Falcons stress and got to enjoy some great games like the Vikings Bills game, which was, pretty incredible. Unfortunately, my Bills couldn't quite pull it off, but we'll see what the rest of the Sunday has in store for us. I'm recording this during the 4:00 game, so we'll see what Sunday night brings to us. So hopefully we'll get something there. But guys, I'm done talking. Again, Desmond Ridder should be the starting moving forward, but Mariota was terrible, but like not so terrible. Not irredeemably terrible is basically the moral of the story watching the film. Like if you take away those 4 really bad turnover worthy plays and then you balance that out with the 4 like anticipatory throws where it's like, oh, this is a different version of Marcus Mariota, it kind of works out to be a wash. So, if they continue to start Mariota, like I'm not going to be thrilled about it, but it is what it is. And so I'll just hope that, next week we'll get 5 of those plays and none of the turnovers. And we'll be saying, hey, that Mariota, he did it. So I'm very curious to see if we see more of that against the Bears. But if we don't, then, we're going to be right back here complaining about Marcus Mariota and screaming for Desmond Ridder. It's only going to get louder from here on. So good luck to you, Arthur Smith. Good luck to you, Dean Pease, in enduring that storm, so to speak. Not the same storm that hit McGarry Island on Thursday night. Marquise Haynes, Hurricane Haynes, did not go particularly well for McGarry Island. But anyway, I'm rambling now at the end of the episode, guys. Really appreciate you. I hope you had a great weekend.